Today I'm going to show you how to make Shuri's Black Panther mask from Wakanda Forever. In this video, I'm going to go a little bit more in depth on how I actually made this so that you can make it yourself. If you didn't see the original video, or if you're not interested in making this yourself, I'll have it linked above and down below in the description. First, we obviously need to prepare the files, which you can find over at do3d.com, who is kindly supporting this video. I've created a print guide which makes it super easy for you to make this yourself, link in the description. But in order to know for sure whether or not your helmet's going to fit, we need to run some tests. The simplest and maybe most effective way to do this is to print out a small portion of the print like this. That's not right. Much better. As you can see, I can put this all the way over my head and take it off super easily, without needing to bend it apart like this. In order to do this in Mesh Mixer, the process is pretty simple. First, you need to import your file, and to do that, you just click Import, and then click on your file. Then to actually cut out the piece that you're going to print, click on Edit on the left-hand side, then Plane Cut, and then it will bring up a sort of plane on your object. So if this is your object and this is the part that you want to cut, just orient it so that it's about in the middle of the mask. And then on the little pop-up box that appears, click Cut, Discard Half, and make sure that the semi-transparent half is the bottom. Then hit OK, and do the same thing again, but flip the plane cut over. And that will leave you with a thin strip like this. Once you've done this, you can print out the entire mask. Now I'm going to briefly go over the print settings I used, but keep in mind that this is completely dependent on your own preferences and situation. First, we have layer height. I thought there were going to be more problems with having such a high layer height on the knurled texture, but there really weren't. So I had a 0.28mm layer height for the larger pieces and a 0.2 to 0.16mm layer height on the smaller pieces. For shells, you can really go as high or low as you want, but I really wouldn't recommend going below 2 to 3 because we are going to be sanding it, and that's going to get rid of some of the shells. Infill. For infill, I usually had mine set between 5 and 15% for the larger pieces, and for the smaller pieces, I had it much higher. I would be extremely impressed if someone could print this without supports. Adhesion, again, really depending on your situation. Usually I just use a skirt. I printed it out pretty fast for my printer just because I had so much to do. Next, I removed all of the supports using a pair of needle nose pliers and some tweezers. And an X-Acto knife. And I was impatient, so I taped all the pieces together just to see if it would fit on me, and it did, so that was pretty cool. Now we can remove the tape and permanently attach the pieces together using a soldering iron. Just be sure to wear a respirator when doing this because we are melting plastic, and don't be an idiot. Everything I said here was true. I just want to add, you should be in a well-ventilated area when you're doing this because we are melting plastic, and it's pretty dangerous. Also, you can use any type of soldering iron pretty much. On the inside of the mask, it's okay to do this a little bit more roughly because it's not going to be as noticeable. But on the outside, you should be more careful. As you can see here, I'm just going over all of the creases and all of this knurled texture where the two pieces intersect with the soldering iron, and that makes it a lot stronger and look better. Safety. I only really used the electric sander for the edges of the mask. For everything else, I used a high grit sandpaper, and in big areas, I used some wood filler. For the wood filler, you put it on so it's just barely overflowing, and then sand it all down. And it takes a couple coats sometimes, but it makes it so much better. While this was looking super good, we still had to sand the detail pieces. Learn from my mistake and be careful when you're removing the supports for these little pieces because I almost broke one in half when I was trying to do it. To sand them, I used a similar process, working from a lower grit up to a higher grit, sometimes using wood filler. It's really helpful to have a pair of files with you because they make smoothing it so much easier. Some of the parts were actually kind of flimsy, so for those, I propped them up on a sanding block and then smoothed around it. Then I started adding the primer. In the beginning, it's okay if you go a little bit overboard on the priming, but by the end, they should be really light coats. After each coat, it's important to go over each piece, giving it a light sanding using a high grit sandpaper. I ended up putting on about 3 coats in total. Once the parts were fully smooth, I put them out to paint them. If you want, you can use one of these. They just attach on a paint can and make it a lot easier to spray, but you don't have to. What you see me using right now is a Krylon Fusion Satin Black. I'll put links for everything I use in the description of this video. Something to remember about painting things like this is that you need to go in very light coats. I probably had about 7 coats on this project. A super easy way to help with that is to make sure that you're keeping the can kind of far away from the prop. That way you're not getting any excessive dripping or spots. And as you can see here, I'm also using the black paint on the parts that are later going to be metallic. The black serves as a sort of undercoat, and it's going to make the final result much more metallic looking. Then I taped off the back piece, which I think looks better multicolor painted. The silver and gold paints I used are Rust-Oleum Bright Coat Metallic Finish. For the multicolor detail pieces, I sprayed on the most prominent color so that later I could go over it using some metallic acrylic paint. Here you can see me painting the silver dots on the front of the mask with the acrylic paint. You could tape it, but I found it much easier to just use a brush. I also did a little bit of dry brushing on the black parts of the mask to make it look slightly metallic. I took some silver acrylic paint on a brush, then completely dried it off on a paper towel. Then, when I brushed the mask, little paint particles came off onto it, and this just makes it look a lot more realistic. It's a good idea to rough up the sides that you're going to glue just using some sandpaper before you actually glue it. To assemble everything, I just used some hot glue because it's really easy to remove if I ever need to change anything. In order to attach the pieces, I used some magnets that I glued into the sides, and to keep the two halves from falling apart completely, I hot glued a piece of elastic at the top. But you could really do this any way you like. Another thing you can do to make this look a lot better is weathering it. I usually just mix some black paint and water, then brush it on. I'm finishing up a video right now that goes a little bit more in depth into this, so subscribe if you want to see that. And now we're done.
Yeah.
I hope you found this video helpful. I'll have links to the print guide down below. Subscribe if you want to learn how to make more cool stuff. Go to do3d.com to download this yourself.